The band Elf may only be relevant to, let's face it, lovers of hard rock, like the kind found right here at the golden age of hard rock. But this band is definitely intertwined in the history and lineage of hard rock. Elf is mainly known in hard rock circles as one of the several bands to have been fronted by legendary vocalist Ronnie James Dio. Elf was an American band from Cortland, New York, who achieved limited commercial success. The band formed in 1967, struggled on the bar and nightclub scene for several years, and eventually landed a recording contract with Epic Records in 1972. Epic Records would go on to hit some major league home runs later in the 70s with bands like Cheap Trick, Boston, Ted Nugent, and REO Speedwagon, to name just a few. For Elf, at the time their recording contract with Epic was signed, the band consisted of Ronnie James Dio on vocals and bass, David Feinstein on guitar, Mickey Lee Soul on keyboards, and Gary Driscoll on drums. Ian Pace and Roger Glover, both of Deep Purple, were selected to run the console and produce Elf's first album. The debut album was recorded between April and July of 1972 at Studio One in Doraville, Georgia, a small, off-the-beaten-path studio which would be used by Lynyrd Skynyrd a year later to record their masterpiece debut album, titled Pronounced Lynyrd Skynyrd. The self-titled debut was released in August 1972. The album contained 8 tracks and came in just over 34 minutes in length. Despite the Deep Purple production pedigree and, frankly, one wicked-ass album cover, the album failed to chart. One single was released, Hoochie Coochie Lady, but it picked up no interest. Back to the cover for just a second, because it is a wicked-ass cover. It was the first professional work of Japanese artist Hiroshi Morishima, and the irony is that it is his only piece of work in the rock genre. He moved on to work exclusively designing album covers for classical music, Bach, Beethoven, Wagner. One positive note on the debut, though, was the Deep Purple connection. With an album under their belt, Deep Purple would begin adding Elf as an opener for their shows in America. And that was good because with nearly non-existent record sales, Elf was soon dropped by Epic Records, which meant that lineup changes were afoot. David Feinstein was out and Steve Edwards was in on guitar. The band also added Craig Gruber on bass, freeing up Dio to handle vocals only. 2 years later, after opening many shows for Deep Purple, Purple Records, owned by Deep Purple, signed Elf to a new recording contract. The Sophomore album, titled Carolina County Ball, was produced by Roger Glover, and this time recording took place in the UK at the Manor Studio just north of Oxford. The album was recorded between January and March of 1974. Carolina County Ball included 9 tracks, a little over 37 minutes of music, and it was released in April of '74. Frustrating for all involved, Carolina County Ball suffered the same fate as the debut by failing to chart. This time, they released LA 59 as a single, but it fell on deaf ears. Elf would give it one more go with their third and final studio album, Trying to Burn the Sun, in 1975. With Roger Glover remaining behind the control panel, recording would take place between January and April of 1975 with a June release. This time, unfortunately, 3 times was not a charm, as Trying to Burn the Sun failed to chart, the same result as the previous 2 albums. As a fan who owns all 3 of these works in my collection, I will say the band does grow and improve with each release. Who knows what would have happened if Elf would have made a 4th album? Maybe the same result, maybe something different. What we do know is that 4 of the 5 guys from Elf hooked up with Ritchie Blackmore, and together they released Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow, the debut album by Rainbow, a mere 2 months later. The odd man out was guitarist Steve Edwards. Obviously, Ritchie Blackmore didn't need or want another guitarist in his band. What's interesting about this fact is that Elf were recording Trying to Burn the Sun at the same time as 4 of the 5 guys were recording Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. After recording was completed though, only Dio would remain in Rainbow. Everyone else would be unceremoniously fired by Ritchie Blackmore prior to the tour for the debut album, and a new crew hired for the tour and the second album, Rising, in 1976. So, what happened to the guys in Elf? First, the good news. You remember David Feinstein, the guitarist on the first album? Well, he is actually the cousin of Ronnie James Dio. He went on to form the Rods, an 80s heavy metal band which had some good records, most notably the debut Rock Hard in 1980, Wild Dogs in 82, and of course one of Tipper Gore's favorites, Let Them Eat Metal in 1984. David is still active, and it's good to see he's keeping his love of metal alive. Next up is Mickey Lee Soul. After the Rainbow debut, Mickey went on to tour in '76 with the Ian Gillan Band as a keyboardist, and he's appeared on a few Roger Glover projects, most notably the album Elements in 1978. He worked on and off as a band tech and roadie for Deep Purple, although today he's retired from the music business. Next, replacement guitarist Steve Edwards. He's a bit of a mystery. Can't find anything on him. After Elf dissolved in 1975, Steve doesn't really show up on the radar anywhere else. So I'm not really sure if Steve is living or deceased. If you know what became of Steve Edwards, please add it to the comments. Bassist Craig Gruber went on to tour with Gary Moore on the Victims of the Future tour, and then played on the We Want More live album in 1984. Unfortunately, Craig passed away in 2015 at the age of 63 from prostate cancer. After being dismissed from Rainbow, drummer Gary Driscoll drifted between day jobs and a few local bands in Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states until, tragically, he was brutally murdered in 1987 in Ithaca, New York. Details remain a mystery to law enforcement, but it's believed that the crime was committed by 2 or more subjects as part of some type of satanic sacrifice. Whatever happened, the crime remains unsolved to this day. Lastly, of course, is the legend Ronnie James Dio. Ronnie remained the vocalist in Rainbow for a few more albums. Rising in 1976, On Stage in '77, and Long Live Rock and Roll in '78. Ronnie then left Rainbow and joined up with Black Sabbath. Ronnie's first album with Sabbath was Heaven and Hell in 1980, followed up by Mob Rules in '81 and the double album Live Evil in '82. Ronnie would then leave Sabbath and take drummer Vinny Appice with him. He would add in Jimmy Bain from Rainbow and a young axe slinger from Ireland named Vivian Campbell to form the band Dio. Right out of the gate, Dio started up with a couple of platinum albums, Holy Diver in '83, Last in Line in '84, and Sacred Heart in '85. Ronnie James Dio would continue to record and perform throughout the '80s, '90s, and 2000s with both his solo band, Dio, Black Sabbath, and Heaven and Hell, a name given to the Black Sabbath lineup that included Ronnie, Tony, Vinny, and Geezer. Sadly, Ronnie James Dio would pass away in 2010 at the age of 67 from stomach cancer. Ronnie's final resting place is at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills area of Los Angeles, California. Although collectively, as a band, Elf never really hit the big time. They never made it to the top of the proverbial rock mountain. But individually, the members of Elf have left their fingerprints on some of the best hard rock ever made. And that's both the tragedy and triumph of Elf. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Golden Age of Hard Rock, and if you're so inclined, smash the like button and subscribe for future episodes. You can also connect on Facebook for daily posts on all things hard rock. Until next time, keep rocking.